Hi. Hey BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March. This is my bookish week for Saturday, September, August 28th. I think I got the date right. It's 2021, I do know the year. I don't know why I do this. I don't know why. I don't know. And I don't know why I don't double check myself when I hit the play button or record button, whatever it is. I'm recording this on Friday afternoon after work. I'm punchy, so sorry about that. Oh boy. Yeah, so it's my bookish week for Saturday, and let me talk about the books that I read, and I'll show you a couple books that I'm currently reading. I had a book that was almost a 5-star read, but I still loved it. It's a great book. It is The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anna Marie Crowhurst. I loved this book. This is the story of Ursula Flight, set in the 1600s. She is a teenage girl. Well, we read her story from young childhood, from birth into childhood. And she is an unconventional girl, born to an unconventional father with a traditional mother who is not that nice. She starts off maybe looking warm and cozy and loving, but not really. But Ursula is raised by her father to learn to read and write and appreciate the arts and astrology. And he points out to her the constellation for Ursula Major and tells her that's what she was named after. And from then on, she is fascinated with the stars, fascinated with astrology. She becomes a playwright in childhood. She starts writing plays. But it's not too long before she's only 13, 14 years old, where she kind of notices that her parents are acting a little differently. Her mother has completely changed the way she treats her and talks to her. And very quickly, she is married off to a man in his 40s. And her father goes along with her mother, and her mother tells her it's just time. It's the tradition. And she gets married to a middle-aged man. As you would expect, it goes horribly wrong. But along the way, we get to know Ursula, and we see how unconventional her attitudes really are. She reminded me a lot of a feistier Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was not exactly a shrinking violet, but Ursula is so interesting and so colorful. She becomes entranced with theater and plays as a child. She goes on to aspire to being an actress, to being in the theater. She wants so badly to go and see plays and productions. She doesn't have the chance to do that as a child. So when we continue to read her story after her marriage, she does try to make the best of being married to this old man with a really nasty mother and sister. And so we also read her journey, what happens to her further on in her life and her adulthood. It is such a beautiful book, outside and in. There are a lot of places in the book where her thoughts are written out in play form, as if she had written them into a play. And that's an interesting technique because those parts of the narrative are some of the more uncomfortable pieces of narrative to read. And the way she did it by the way Crowhurst wrote it, as if it's coming from Ursula as a playwright, that she's writing down these very unpleasant emotions and situations. That was a really interesting technique, and I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of different types of technique that this author uses. It's not just straight narrative. There's a lot of narrative that looks like a play. There's a lot of narrative that is an actual play or plays. So it's such an interesting book. I loved Ursula as a character. I absolutely loved the ending. And this, it's 5 stars on Goodreads, but I gave it like a 4.5. It was not quite perfect for me, but it was pretty damn close. So I would definitely highly recommend that book. The next one I finished on my Kindle, and it's called The Misremembered Man by Christina McKenna. And Christina McKenna is an Irish author. She grew up in Northern Ireland. And this is a story set in the Irish countryside in the 70s. The main character is Jamie McClune. He is an Irish farmer who's, I think, in his early to mid 40s. And the other character that we meet very quickly on is Lydia Devine, who is 41, I think. This was so sweet and such a funny book. It was such a joy to read until the ending, and I'll get there. But I really loved this book, and for a very long time, it was skating up to a 5-star read for me. But the ending was wrapped up so fast and so conveniently that it was a 4. It became a 4-star read. But I truly loved reading this book. They are two single, mid-40-ish adults. Jamie McClune lives on a farm that he inherited. He lives alone. He's always been alone. And Lydia Devine lives with her elderly mother, who she takes care of. So they're both lonely. They're both revisiting their lives and wondering, is this all that there is in life for me? Jamie has friends who are a married couple, Rose and Patty, and they convince him to put an ad in the newspaper or to look at the newspaper, the Personals ad, to see if he can find a wife. And Lydia has decided to write into the Personals to try to find a husband. And it's so funny. I laughed out loud in so many places. Just the quaintness and the shenanigans and the dialogue. The dialogue is hilarious. And you start to love Jamie, and you start to see how quirky and awkward, how not ignorant, but kind of behind the times that he is. He's shy, he is friendly, but he just doesn't know how to conduct himself. So Patty and Rose are kind of his family mentors, and they are the only people close to him. He has no other family. In between those chapters, it is a backstory of Jamie, and he grew up in a Catholic orphanage for many years of his childhood until he was actually adopted, I believe, at the age of 10. But his experience in the orphanage was horrifying and traumatic. And so we get those flashbacks of what happened to him during that time. And it defines the person that he becomes, and it defines his character and his personality. But he stays so sweet and so heartwarming and quirky and awkward through the entire book. I just loved it. And I love novels set in Ireland in this time period. I thought it would make a really good, quaint movie. And I've watched many movies that are set in the Irish countryside, and I don't know what it is about that tone and atmosphere, but I just love them. I just love it. So I really loved reading this book. Again, the end was way too quickly and conveniently wrapped up with one coincidence after another. But I don't care. I just loved it. And it's the first in a trilogy. From what I hear, you don't need to read them in order. You can kind of dip in and out. But the same characters do appear in the 3 books. And I read it on my Kindle, and I have since ordered all 3 of the books in hard copy because I want them on my shelf. So, what else? Oh, I finished Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, and this was shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, so last year's Booker Prize. Avni Doshi is an Indian author who is now based in Dubai in the Middle East. She actually was born in New Jersey. And this is the story of Tara and Aunt Tara, a mother and daughter couple who have a very complex and conflicted relationship. We read the story about Aunt Tara's childhood with her mother Tara. There was abuse and neglect and dysfunction all over the place. Tara was married off to her husband, who she didn't love, who is Aunt Tara's father. She abandoned her husband, took Aunt Tara as a baby to live on an ashram with a cult leader called Baba. And you read the backstory, you read the dysfunction and the neglect, and Antara does not have a typical mother who shows her warmth and care and love. It's very different than that. So you read, it goes back and forth in time from chapter to chapter, and we read the development of this complexity between the two of them. We understand that Antara is now married to her husband Dilip, and her mother Tara has started to decline into dementia. And it's very clear, we very clearly read that Antara has a very twisted and dysfunctional attitude towards her mother. She is her only child, so she becomes her caretaker. And we read Antara's thoughts about that, how she doesn't want to do that. She loves her mother dearly. She can't stand her mother. She cries when she sees her mother's decline. She goes to every doctor's appointment. She does the research, the medical research. But it goes back and forth. And by flashbacks in time, we get to kind of put together the pieces of why this relationship is so dysfunctional. It's an interesting book. I didn't love it because I thought she kind of threw everything together. And I didn't like the time jumps because it wasn't done in a way where it was that easy to follow, in my opinion. She kind of took that pot. I read it, I buddy read it with my friend Michelle from the Critical Chicks, and I told Michelle it's like literary soup. She threw a whole bunch of stuff in a pot, she stirred it up, she kept throwing some more stuff. Oh, this will be good, this will be good. And she continues to stir, and at the very last moment she adds the spices, so it doesn't really all blend together. That's what I felt when I was done with this book. And the writing was good. I didn't think it was excellent. I thought the sentences were brief and under-descripted. Does that make sense? Is that a word? And in a weird way, throughout the text, she writes a lot of questions that never really get answered. So there's a lot of rhetorical questions peppered throughout the narrative. I didn't like that. One thing I have to say is reading the reviews on this book, there were so many reviews from people that said she's an awful person. How could she treat her mother that way? And that's so shocking to me because it's very clear why she treated her mother this way. It's very clear why she is who she is and how her personality and her character developed. It's very obvious from reading the book. So anybody who writes that kind of a review didn't get it. So it was okay. The last book I finished on audio, and it is called Becoming a Man, A Story of a Transition by P. Carl. This should have been and could have been a really important book and a really fascinating book. And there were points where it was. This is the story of he goes by Carl. This is the story of Carl's transition at the age of 50 to becoming the man that he always was. He was assigned female at birth. He was born a girl and a daughter according to his family and his parents, and you all know what I mean by that. But he didn't transition for 50 years. And so this is his story about his journey, or it's supposed to be. There were a couple of suicide attempts. There was mental illness diagnoses. There was all of the discussion of knowing he's in the wrong body. He was a little boy and he wanted to be a teenage boy and wanted to be an adult man, a young adult man, and missed out on all of that. He's very transparent about that. However, he lived as a lesbian until the age of 50, has been married to his wife for decades, and they were married for 20 years before he actually transitioned physically, using testosterone, having surgery, that type of thing. It got a lot convoluted because at some points he was resentful at his wife for being upset after his transition. This is a lesbian woman who had been a lesbian her entire life. And now, after 20 years of marriage, her wife transitions into her husband. And there's a lot that's complex. There's a lot going on there. And he got very impatient with his wife for not accepting him faster. I think that's the major issue I had with his story. There needs to be an allowance for a partner of a person who transitions. She's a lesbian and is attracted to women. And if he has transitioned and is now a man, or is in his male body, there's a lot there that his wife had to work through. And he gets very whiny about that. Towards the end of the book, I want to talk about this, but I'm not going to because it's a little bit of a spoil. I don't want to talk about that. A lot of this book is just rambles and rants. He talks about all kinds of stuff. Politics, his birth family. He had a shitty father, very obviously. Dysfunctional parents, dysfunctional family. Grew up with two brothers, two loving brothers. Talks about his extended family, talks about friends, talks about white male privilege, talks about misogyny. And the interesting thing, another big issue that I had, discusses misogyny, but once transitions to a man, falls right into the male stereotype, even admitting that he enjoys being a white male and the machismo that comes with it. The privileged position to exist unseen, to just be accepted without question, falls into conversations where he's trash-talking his wife and with other guys, starts using words like bro and dude and hey man, and enters into all of the masculine stereotypes that he had looked forward to. Beer, sports, rock climbing, collecting sneakers, collecting designer sweatpants. He talks about all that stuff as if that's what he loves to do as a guy, and is very much a guy's guy. So he took that misogyny from the beginning of the story, beginning of his life in the book, and falls into it after his transition. The sections of the book are all over the place. I wanted to read the perspective of this man who transitioned. I wanted to read a more put together text of tell me more about this, go deeper into that. And what we receive is something that's all over the place, talking about traveling and shopping and working out, and no, it didn't hit it for me. It's a very important conversation. Books like these are very important to read, and those voices are very important to listen to, but this one just did not hit it. So, those are the 4 books I finished last week. Very quickly, I am currently reading Birdsong by Sebastian Fox, and this is a buddy read with Freddie from Sluggish Reader. I will finish it this weekend, I think, and hopefully Freddie and I will connect next week, and I will wrap this up next weekend. And the very last book for the BookTube Prize Finals in Fiction that I need to read is The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emeze, and I can't say anything about it because I'm reading it for the BookTube Prize. That is it for this weekend. I went to the bookstore last night. You'll be watching this on Saturday, and I don't know yet what I bought because I'm doing this before I go. Does that make any sense? I think you get it. Let me know in the comments below what you think of any of the books or any of the thoughts that you have, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.